So today we're going to talk about women's roles in World War II.
Alright, let's start with the roles of the women on the home front. An often overlooked and understated element of the war is the woman's contribution. Women worked in factories, governments, or volunteered. On top of all that, they had to take care of their family back at home. Thus, many women were found joining the labor force. In the labor force, women mostly worked in factories during this war. They took jobs that men left behind and produced materials for the war. Between 1940 and 1945, the female percentage of U.S. workforce increased from 27% to 37%. Now, in munitions factories, women produced war-related goods. They worked as welders, electricians, and riveters. These women migrated from rural areas in order to find these jobs, and still worked despite having bad housing, shortage of food, and shortage of gas, all due to rationing, of course. Now, on the next slide, women worked also in military production factories. They produced aircrafts, ships, tanks, and landing crafts. These women worked up to 6 days a week, and with the help of these women workers, industrial production doubled between 1939 and 1945. Not all women worked. The women who didn't work volunteered. These women grew victory gardens, collected produce to be canned for troops, sold war bonds, donated blood, supported rationing, and salvaged needed commodities which were sent to troops for materials. In the next slide, a specific volunteering group is the USO, or United Service Organization. They had professional entertainers who volunteered to perform at military bases, and like Red Cross, USO volunteers assembled packs of comfort items distributed to the troops. Not everyone worked in factories or volunteered, however. So therefore, the women were recruited by the government as government girls. They worked in the Office of Strategic Service in order to gather intelligence and break codes. By 1944, women held more than a third of the jobs in the federal government.
Propaganda posters like these were made to encourage women to join the workforce, both military and industry. Most women feared that they would lose their sense of feminism, so it was common to portray the women in these posters as very girly. Men, however, feared that women would not have time to perform their household duties. Since most of the men enlisted in the war, many women were left at home. They became the head of the household, and if they had a job, they could support their family on their own. It would be the first time they would have an opportunity like this, as they were always dependent on men. Along with an industrial job, women had to come home after a tiring day at work and still be expected to do their household duties, such as cooking, cleaning, and tending to their children. Some called this the second shift. Many women during this time hired caretakers or sent their children to daycares. Men working alongside women felt uncomfortable with their presence. Most men could not bear to treat women as their peers because females were often housewives who spent most of their time in the kitchen. Men also viewed women as mentally and physically weaker, so they thought it would be difficult for them to do industrial work. Women served as nurses, WAVs, WACs, WASPs, SPARs, and spies during this time. Though they were organizations for women only, they were only temporary jobs. Women during this time often served as nurses. Most men paid no mind to women taking this position because females were often seen and stereotyped as nurturers. This stereotype came about because women were always at home to take care of their children. WAVs, or women accepted for volunteer emergency service, worked with the Navy. However, a large proportion of this organization did clerical work. Some of the lucky ones worked with the aviation community. 1 year after its startup, there were already 27,000 members.
So another group in the Army was the Women's Army Corps. It was initially the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and 150,000 women enlisted. These were the first women to be in the Army besides nurses. and they essentially stood in for the men who left and allowed them to go be in combat while filling in their roles in the States. Now, the WAFs were the Women Air Force Service Pilots. These were the first women to fly military planes ever. These were all female civilians, not officially a part of the military, so they had no injury or death benefits, and essentially stood in for male pilots without having any official military recognition. The SPARS was the female Coast Guard. The U.S. Coast Guard Women's Reserve was created in November 1942 by Public Law 773. 10,000 women enlisted, even though they only had a goal of 1,000. And once again, they freed up men stateside to go fight in the war. And women also worked as spies in the war. Women served on either the Special Operations Executive or the Office of Strategic Services, and these were both parts of the government. They often parachuted into enemy land and worked as social spies, meaning that they were in the enemy officers' dating pools and social circles. In this war, women were the U.S.'s secret weapons. Men were able to fight because women took care of the jobs and the children that they were leaving behind. And women also worked in a lot of jobs to help keep the war going, such as munition factories. Many commanders who commanded women in the army demanded more. After the war, men came back, and a lot of them got their jobs back, and the war production ceased because there was no more demand. So a lot of women basically were limited to being domestic workers again. But 75% of the women in the workforce kept their jobs. And so in this way, World War II really was vital for women's roles changing in the U.S.